All right, what's up, guys? So I am joined here today with Gavin McCort. He is a registered dietitian and also does online coaching. He also was mentored under Scott Stevenson, so that's another interesting thing where he learned a lot under that mentorship, but also has a ton of information on his own. So today we're going to talk to you guys a little bit about blood pressure, just different topics that can contribute to blood pressure, and also going to be asking some questions at the end of this that I have logged down here that some of you have asked. So we can get into it. And Gavin, I guess if you want to give any kind of other kind of introductions for yourself, otherwise we can just get started.
Okay, just give it a little short thing. I mean, I've been coaching for the past almost 7 years now. Um, got a bachelor's degree in nutrition dietetics from Kaiser University. Been a dietitian for right around a year now. Had my degree for about 3 years now. I mostly do clinical stuff. I do some coaching of bodybuilders and stuff, but I focus more on the clinical side of things, just
Okay.
getting people healthier, keeping people healthy.
And that definitely comes in handy with bodybuilding and the performance side of things, especially now that that's becoming more of an interest in modern bodybuilding. So
And my main focus in the clinical stuff is renal dietetics, so that is a direct correlation with, kidney function, blood pressure, and things like that anyway.
yeah, that's a perfect carryover.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I mean, we can just get into it. And so I guess most of this conversation will be from you, from your perspective,
Mhm,
what you've seen that can contribute to high blood pressure, how we can manage high blood pressure, and what how big of a deal that is in bodybuilding, or just
mhm,
performance oriented sports.
mhm. So, like, go over the things that the major factors that I see that contribute for bodybuilders?
Yeah,
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 because most people think it's just the drug component. There's a lot more to it, especially since, I mean, we're in a society where, everything we do is almost s a lot of the stuff we do is digital, and when you don't have good connections with people, you don't have a good way of communicating with people, it does put you in a more stressful environment, and stress I've seen be one of the biggest contributors to blood pressure, because you always hear cortisol, that can cause water retention, that can contribute to blood pressure, but then when you're stressed, that's going to release, things like adrenaline, norepinephrine, things like that, that can also cause a increase in blood pressure as well. And then, of course, there is going to be the drug component.
mm,
With drugs, that you're going to be increasing your red blood cell count, increasing hemoglobin hematocrit. You're going to increase you're going to have a change in the viscosity of your blood. So that's going to cause, more pressure on the walls of your veins and capillaries already. Same thing with your arteries,
mm,
but a lot of it's going to be more of your lifestyle and your stress related factors. So, uh, even though bodybuilders they talk about maintaining a good diet, most of them under drink water or overeat sodium. Those are going to be big things.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean I could say that from experience. Unless you're in prep, most bodybuilders don't drink enough water,
Right. Yeah.
and especially in the off season you're eating a lot of food, a lot of times you're over seasoning with salt, you maybe getting 5, 6, 7, 8,000 milligrams of sodium, and oh, I only drank 3 liters today
Right. Yeah.
for,
Yeah. I noticed, especially with me, I have that problem as food gets really high. Especially like during meals, I kind of don't drink water at all because I just need to get the food down. But even
Mhm,
between, like, you have maybe an hour or 2 hours to drink water, and sometimes I just forget. And just having that much extra fluid in your stomach while you already have a lot of food sitting there can be pretty uncomfortable.
and even just like, okay, let's say you're talking about your higher level bodybuilders and you are going, and, let's be honest, if you're on the higher level, you're going to be taking a bit more stuff than the guy in the amateur levels
Right.
usually.
Yeah.
Just by taking, like, you have additional compounds, higher dosages of additional compounds, not only is it going to affect blood pressure because of the, like, the blood component, the hemoglobin, hematocrit, and stuff like that. The more stuff you take, your body's going to recognize that as a stressor. That's going to release stress hormones right there. So it's going to be multifaceted in terms of that. And outside the gym, and I'm mostly focusing on the off season because that's where bodybuilders have the most difficulty with high blood pressure. Is they're not active. A lot of them are not doing cardio outside the gym. A lot of them are not sleeping as well as they should. Some of the bigger bodybuilders, and you have experience with that, you have sleep apnea. Those
Right.
are going to, if you have sleep apnea, unless you're using a CPAP and you're getting used to that CPAP, your sleep quality is going to be terrible.
Yeah. Like for me, it started happening as soon as I started getting above like 210 pounds. Or, I mean, I think I've always had trouble where I'd like toss and turn in my sleep, but
Mhm,
after 210, like I would like kind of wake myself up a couple times just when I was holding my breath. Like I'd have to
mhm,
wake up gasping for air, and that's kind of
mhm.
the moment I realized I need a CPAP. So yeah, if you're a bodybuilder in the off season and you have these problems, definitely need to get a CPAP and need to address that.
Yep.
And
And then,
getting
of
used to
course,
it is another topic. But luckily, I got used to mine.
yep. And of course, the last one, and it's the other obvious one for larger bodybuilders, is the bigger you are, the more your heart's gonna have to pump. So the more total body mass you have, the harder it's going to have to pump, the higher your blood pressure is going to be. So, but it's not just the drug component, it's not just the weight component, it's multifaceted. A lot of it just works together.
Mhm. Right. And especially in the off season, um, you have higher water retention compared to something like pre-contest, and that can also play into the type of drugs that you use.
Hmm.
Especially like, I mean, for myself, a couple of years ago, I used to love doing like D-ball in the off season because it makes you feel big, makes you feel strong, but that also has its effects on blood pressure, and you're walking around with like 10, 15 pounds of just water on you, that's also going to build up and contribute to the increased blood pressure. So, responsible PED use, and there may be times to make better decisions on the compounds that you use and make sure that water retention is being controlled to an extent that you can control it, to keep those things a little bit more under control.
And one last thing I do want to mention is another thing to mention for that, especially for PED use. Um, get a calcium score done because atherosclerosis, having plaque buildup in your blood passageways, of course, that's going to cause that can contribute to high blood pressure. I mean, you're cutting down the amount of blood flow you have already.
Right.
So that being able to address that and be able to reverse that if you have any, that can also help long term. It's not going to be more the acute thing. That's more of a long term thing.
Right. I mean, if you have a big opening, it's easier for blood to go through. If it gets smaller, even aside from constriction, because we have things like ACE inhibitors that prevent vasoconstriction, but just with calcium, if that calcium is surrounding an artery, the what's the word? The area that the volume can go through becomes smaller, so it's going to be
Hmm.
more difficult for blood to flow through that. And quick product plug here, something like a D3K2 supplement can help with, you know, clearing out those arteries and assisting in removing that calcium from your arteries and, making sure it gets absorbed somewhere where it's more useful.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think we covered most of those topics.
Mhm.
Anything about like aldosterone and um, there's that other hormone that you mentioned, right?
Yeah, vasopressin, antidiuretic hormone.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, those are the things that you're definitely going to see The most common times you're gonna see those words thrown around is when you're like peaking for a show. So aldosterone, when that's high, you're going to retain more sodium. When antidiuretic hormone is high, you're going to retain more body water in general. So vasopressin, which is antidiuretic hormone, it's not just a hormone that your body makes. That is mainly where you're going to see it, but it's also used clinically for people that go into like hypotensive shock. So, for instance, when someone's septic, they have sepsis, they have a blood infection. If you go into septic shock, you're going to have a rapid decrease in blood pressure. And a lot of times, in order to get blood pressure back up while they address the reason for the septic shock, they'll pump people full of IV fluids, so D5 saline usually, which is 5% dextrose with normal saline. So of course you have the extra sodium and electrolytes in there, but you're also going to have the carbohydrates to shuttle more fluids as well. But then they're going to use high amounts of vasopressin to get their blood pressure back up. And I have some very good experience with that because 2013, I was dead in a hospital bed, and that's what they did to me to get my blood pressure back up.
Oh shit, really?
Yeah, I had sepsis in 2013. I went to septic shock. I had my blood pressure dropped below 30 over 5.
Wow. Holy
Yeah,
shit.
it was only for a few minutes, but they were able to use IV fluids and vasopressin and all that to get my blood pressure back up in order to get the heart pumping the way it needed to again.
Mhm. Wow. That's, that's insane.
Everybody's always like, "Oh, what did you see anything?" It's like, "No, I don't think I was gone long enough.
Okay. Yeah.
I was still in the waiting room."
Uh, yeah. I think they're able to bring you back with that.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I'll get into a couple questions that we got. Let me some of them are on my phone here. So the first one was I've always been close to hypertension. Am I going to die? That's the first part of the question. And then the second part of the question is there a genetic predisposition to high blood pressure?
Okay, so for the first part, no, you're not gonna die. Um, I mean, hypertension is really something that's you're on a sliding scale for that. There's different degrees of it. So, there you can be pre-hypertensive. I think that goes up to I think it's 139. There's,
Yeah.
the American Heart Association recently changed normal blood pressure. It used to be 120 over 80. For systolic, it's now 130. And I think pre-hypertensive is between 131 and 139. Hypertensive one is above 140. And then it goes up from there. Uh, just because you're pre-hypertensive does not mean you're going to die. So even if you're close, it's not necessarily something to worry about. There is a genetic component for some people, whether you're hyper or hypotensive. Like I know someone like her normal blood pressure is like 110 to 115 over in the 60s and 70s. Like she typically has lower blood pressure. Me, I tend to hover in the mid 120s, upper 120s, over in the low 80s, stuff like that. I mean, to some people that they're like, oh, you're not 120 over 80, you're hypertensive. It's like, keep in mind that's just an average. So the 120 over 80 that was around for the longest time, that's just average normal blood pressure across the board. They do that over just a large sample size. So some people may be a bit above that. Some people may be a little bit below that, but just because you're a little bit above or below does not mean that you're messed up in any way.
Okay. Yeah. It's kind of like a standard bell curve.
Yeah,
And the majority of averages, if you average it out, it's going to be 120 over 80. That doesn't necessarily mean that like you have to have that perfect score of 120 over 80 to qualify as having normal blood pressure.
yeah. Like I have a client. He did his first cycle this year, and his blood pressure went up like 5 or 6 points. He's like, "Am I gonna die?" It's like, no, that's normal. He was in like the
Stop
mid
everything
120s,
needed.
and then after a while, his body balanced out. It's like, oh, I'm in the low 120s again. It's like, yeah, yeah, you're fine.
Okay, he kind of adapted to it or something.
Yeah, unless your kidneys are straight up fucked. Uh, uh, a like transient changes in blood pressure is not going to really make a difference.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now if you, let's say your blood pressure is in like the 150s, 160s chronically, oh yeah, you've got a problem.
Right,
You need to talk to a doctor or get some sort of supplemental or prescription help on that.
right. I agree. Okay.
I would start
Another,
with supplements first.
yeah. Another question. Someone asking how to bring down high blood pressure and hemoglobin levels other than therapeutic phlebotomy.
Oh, okay. That's easy. So one of the probably the cheapest and easiest way that you can bring down blood pressure is just to be more active. Like I've seen people, they're sedentary. They have desk jobs, and they don't really move very much. They don't have good blood flow to begin with.
Mhm.
I've had them go do 3 10-minute walks a day, and their blood pressure dropped 10 points
Wow.
over the course of a few weeks.
Wow.
So just by being more active, you can lower blood pressure, because you got to see, okay, why is my blood pressure high? Is my blood pressure high because I'm eating a ton of sodium and I'm not drinking enough water? Well, you can adjust one of those variables. You could drink more water to flush out the extra sodium. You
Mhm.
can bring down your sodium to correlate with your to correspond with your water intake, or do a little bit of both. There's supplements you can take. There's pine bark extract is a really good one. That's a vasodilator. Um, uh, what was the vasodrive AP, which is in your Hemo Flow, that
Right.
helps with that. IP6. Especially guys that are on anabolic steroids, they're going to have more iron retention, so they're already going to have an increased production hemoglobin hematocrit. Even guys on TRT. I mean, Dante's been a big proponent of talking about that. So, inositol hexaphosphate, which is a chelator of iron, helps remove excess iron. And a way you can alleviate that without even having to use that is, okay, look at your diet. Are you getting excessive amounts of iron from certain things? Because bodybuilders, they love cream of rice or rice in general. A lot of the rice that you buy on the market or cream of rice is fortified with iron. So a lot of bodybuilders are getting a ton of iron, even more than they need, because we already have a high protein diet anyway. We're already getting plenty from meat.
Yeah. 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 And my response to this guy's question is we also just came out with a product specifically for hematocrit and hemoglobin, which is Hemo
Yep.
Flow. You can look at it. Like Gavin said, we have the vasodrive AP, which functions as an ACE inhibitor
Yep.
using both of those peptides. We also have an iron chelator in there. Dihydroquercetin works a little bit differently than IP6, but that's another option that you have
Mm-hmm.
for you. So another question I have here is if there is any kind of significant difference between prescription ARBs and ACE inhibitors when it comes to prescription blood pressure medications. If any of them have more severe side effects or just anything that if someone has to make the choice between picking an ARB or an ACE inhibitor, should they have any preference for one over the
Um, so I've seen both used. So you have like telmisartan, and then you have ramipril, lisinopril as an ACE inhibitor. Both were very similar. They achieve the same end goal, of course, lowering blood pressure. ACE inhibitor, so that's a angiotensin converting enzyme blocker. So it's going to block the conversion of angiotensin, which is it opens up blood passageways. It prevents the conversion of angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2, which is a vasoconstrictor. Whereas an ARB it blocks the receptor site of angiotensin 2, so it doesn't prevent it from being from the conversion. It just blocks the enzymatic binding of it. So, or it blocks the receptor binding. I mean,
other?
so I mean, it's kind of like what we were talking about before we started this. So, an ACE inhibitor could be like an aromatase inhibitor. So, using like aromasin or arimidex to prevent testosterone from being converted into estrogen, and then something like you know, Primo Masteron, I mean, it binds up aromatase, so it doesn't get rid of it. It just blocks the receptor for it. So it does similar things, or even using a SERM to for the conversion or for the blocking the receptor for estrogen. I
Right.
mean, they achieve similar goals, um, just in different ways.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
terms,
They both basically accomplish the same thing. It's just the mechanism of action is a little different, but I mean,
yep,
end result is.
I've not really seen much in the way of differing in side effects. Um, I mean, both work well. I mean, I've seen plenty of coaches recommend both. I lean more towards ACE inhibitors because I have more experience with those.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Let's see. And then last question I have here is if you see any other blood work markers typically that can correlate with high blood pressure or typically accompany someone who has high blood pressure.
So there's going to be a few, and the first ones are going to be like hydration markers. So like if you have high sodium, that means that's a telltale sign typically, unless you have compromised kidneys. If you have high sodium, you're typically going to be dehydrated. Another thing would be BUN. When BUN is really high, unless you just recently trained or something like that, um, it can be a sign that you didn't drink enough water. Like I said, hydration status is going to be a big player for blood pressure. So if you have low hydration, then your blood concentration is going to be much higher, which is why your blood urea nitrogen is going to be higher to begin with. And so that's going to change the viscosity of your blood, which can make it a little bit thicker. Then the other one is going to be hemoglobin hematocrit. There's going to be another big one, which we already know. It's like when your hemoglobin hematocrit are high and everything else is normal, that's going to increase thickness of the blood as well. That can increase blood pressure. Other than that, it's going to be more physical findings than blood work findings.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Let me see. Oh, another thing I wanted to ask. So if let's say you have your systolic blood pressure is like in the 120s and it's normal. Like how much concern should someone or how much attention should someone pay to the diastolic number? What if the diastolic number is like abnormally low, abnormally high? Is the systolic usually the one that you pay more attention to, or would you say they're both kind of equal?
It depends because systolic is going to be your heart beating and it's pumping blood out of the heart. Your diastolic is your return blood flow where your heart relaxes and it fills with blood. So I would pay more attention, and especially for bodybuilders, because we always hear about the left ventricular hypertrophy.
Mhm.
That's going to be more associated with systolic more than diastolic. But I would say if one is completely out of spec, one is normal, then of course you're going to pay attention to the one that's going to be completely out of range. Is if either one is really out of range, then they're both worth paying attention to. For bodybuilders, you're going to see a lot more for the systolic, simply because that is what's putting more actual stress on the heart, whereas the other one is more stress on blood passageways.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Good answer. Um, okay, I think that's all the questions that I have. So I think this will just about wrap up this conversation.
One thing I did
Yeah.
forget to mention on the blood markers. So of course, GFR. So if you have poor kidney function,
Mhm.
you're not able to filter stuff out. A lot of times when you have compromised kidneys, you also have a harder time um, removing total body water as well. So of course, if you have high total body water, just like high total body weight in general, that can also affect your blood pressure as well.
Okay, got it. All right. Yeah, I think this will about wrap it up. Gavin, thanks for joining us on
Thanks for having me.
our topic of blood pressure, and hopefully we'll find another cool topic that you guys will be interested in, and we can ask questions and go from there.
I'm totally down for that. Thank you so much.
All right, man. Sounds good.